Hello, fabulous friends, fans, and superstars. Welcome to Synchronicity Web TV. I am your host, Nadiya Shah, and this is your moment of synchronicity. Well, I'm so excited to celebrate with you today, Jenny Sieck. Now, Jenny and I have been interacting online for years, I'll tell you, for years. And I have loved getting to know her. She brings so much wisdom to her comments, to my posts, and our interactions. And now Jenny is coming to Synchronicity University as part of the July 2025 speaker series. As this is publishing, you've got just a little time left to choose your tuition rate. As always, just $5 a class to learn from Jenny and these other incredible astrologers. I'm looking forward to talking to her today about alchemical, psychology, and so much more. Jenny, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Nadiya.
Well, it's so nice to get to know you in this way, other than just reading you. But still, I've so appreciated the positive energy that you've given over the years. How nice to have you at Synchronicity University and here in this conversation. And so, alchemical psychology, it sounds fascinating. Define that, please.
So it's a big topic, right? It has to do with what we would now call earth, air, fire, and water work. And now in our culture, we would look at it in terms of astrology, in terms of tarot, in terms of some of these modalities in metaphysical communication. But back in the day, between the 16 and 1800s, it was a very different way of approaching the world and approaching philosophy. That was the time of the Right of Kings. So there were alchemists in these courts, and they would to please the king, they would work with energies of what was called the retort, which was an enclosed space that heated up, where they would work with alchemical energies, earth, air, fire, and water in different combinations that they believed were the correlates to astrology now. Back in the day, they believed these were literal things initially. And what that meant is that they could turn lead into gold. And they really believed this. But over time, these alchemists realized that they couldn't do it literally. It was not a literalization process. It had more to do with an idea of character, what they would have called character and calling back in the day. And that had to do with this idea of fixities of properties that would mix and combine, that had to do with how a person would show up energetically in their lives. Now, during the Right of Kings, the kings were particularly interested in the idea of having gold, right? So they needed to focus on the literalization of this. So the alchemists were in a really kind of funky position in the kingdom because they had to act like they were going to do this thing literally when they realized that what they were doing was an intrapsychic, what we would call now an intrapsychic process.
And so around what time was that they realized that, hey, this might actually be, maybe they didn't use the word psychology, but as you said, interpsychic. When do you think that was? And you used another phrase. You said in the time of some kings or something like that.
The Right of Kings.
The Right of Kings. When was that?
So it was between the 16 and 1800s in the Middle Ages. And the Right of Kings, this was the idea that the kings believed that they were chosen by God to lead. So they were held on high because they were chosen. So they believed that they were entitled to everything, and then the serfs had nothing, basically, in the kingdom around the area. So then I think it's very interesting to think of this idea of these people who had nothing, who were working on the land, who had to work empirically, right, with things. They had to work through trial and error to make things work. Like, for instance, we think of the idea of the hearth, right, the center of the home, which has to do with fire, calcionado principle. So this had to do with a celestial warming energy that was, now it is the correlate in the Myers Briggs to the idea of intuition. But back then, it was very central to the way that they would do something, because if they didn't have a hot enough fire, they couldn't warm the environment, right? So they would freeze. So these things were very, very important to be done to spec, so to speak, because things wouldn't work if they didn't. So I think it's interesting to think about how these common people on the land had to work with the elements in order to survive, right?
So, sorry, you might have said this, but how
Hmm.
long ago was it that we see evidence that these alchemists start to recognize that this isn't necessarily a physical process, but it is actually more, I think you called it intrapsychic.
They wouldn't have called it intrapsychic back
Mhm.
then. They would have called it something like about character, refinement of character, right? So the 1600s between the 1800s, I don't exactly know, but they were in the kingdoms. They were stuck there. They had to please the king, and it would be pretty obvious pretty quickly that they couldn't really turn lead into gold, that this was a synthesization process, a refinement process that had to do with the way that energy showed up in the body and in the spirit, so to speak.
Now, I've always loved alchemy and the whole notion about it, and I know I've talked about it over the years on my channel as well. And I know, like, nobody I met personally, but ancestrally, I know that, like, we can trace ancestral lines going back 1500 years to people who practiced alchemy. So I think
Yes,
that I've always felt that connection to it very strongly. And astrology being a practice of alchemy is how I've understood it for a
absolutely.
long time. And so, can you tell us about that? How do you see astrology as a practice of alchemy? Because I know that alchemists used astrology, but how
Yes.
do you see the connection?
Well, so we have to kind of look at the basic elements and in their Latin form. So we have calcionato, which is fire energy. We have sublimatio, which is air energy. We have solutio, which is water energy.
Mhm.
And we have coagulatio, which is earth energy. So when you're working in this retort, in this contained
Mhm.
space where energies were being shifted and merged and this alchemical process was going on, you were working to refine and purify these agents. So with astrology, with modern astrology, we're looking at earth is Taurus, Capricorn, Virgo, water is Scorpio, Cancer, Pisces, air is Gemini, Aquarius, Libra, and water, fire is the Sagittarius, Aries, right?
Yeah.
So these have fixed properties, right? So they have ways that they function as fixed properties. Did I answer your question well?
I think so. You were saying that the signs are connected to the elements, and so is the understanding of the tools available to the alchemists. And
Exactly. Yes.
so, when was it like? Because to me, what I find really fascinating about the symbolic, psychological side of alchemy is this idea of turning lead into gold, turning that thing that feels like weight, that feels like a burden,
Yes.
that feels
Heavy,
like it
dark.
holds you back, and making
Yes.
it into a source of wealth.
Yes, exactly. So, or abundance. So that you're talking there about the idea of the negrito, which is this darkening principle, right? And if you look at the Middle Ages and you look at indigenous nature-based cultures, if we throw that into there, you have the idea of the fire again. You go back to the fire because the tribe had to be around the fire, or it was dark and it was the unknown. The correlate to this would be the shadow in Jungian psychology now, right?
Mm.
So if you're looking at that, you're looking at this idea of a refining process, a lightening and brightening process. And now we would call this the individuation process, the Jungian individuation process, right? That back then they would call this the conjunctio oppositorum, which means a combining of opposites. Right now in Jungian psychology, they call this a combining of opposites to create a third thing that takes a duality and brings it together, draws something together, and creates a more refined energy. They would call it back then the Conjunctio Oppositorum, but there were two ideas about the Conjunctio Oppositorum. The minor needed to have a catalyst, right? So something to bring it into refinement and into being. The major is the idea of the divine marriage, right? The idea that you don't need an outside catalyst to refuel the energy of fire in the psyche, right? So now we could look at it as, someone we're dating who brings a lot of joy into our life. That's the minor conjunctio. That is like, this person is a catalyst. They inspire me. They feed me. Or a certain type of movie, anything really. But when we realize that we can raise this energy in ourselves without this catalyst, we have more refinement, more wisdom, more ability to create and light this fire inside of our spirit, so to speak.
Wow. And so the way that you are understanding and explaining it is the alchemical process is finding that spark, and that
Yes.
spark is what takes us from lead to gold.
Very much so. Finding the lightness, the brightness, what they would have called the celestial fire back in the day, right? This idea of the spiritual fire.
And from that spiritual fire, it gives one what? Enthusiasm, purpose. What do you think?
Intuition, because if we break it down, like I like to think about this in relationship to the Myers Briggs, right? So if we look at this, the intuition is the function of fire, calcionado, and it has to do with this lightning brightening element. That is fire energy. Water energy is feeling energy, right? It is in astrology, Scorpio, Cancer, Pisces. Earth energy is doing energy, so working the land, right? And air energy is thinking energy. So I like to kind of think about these energies as a tendency in spirit, or a fixed property that all function together. Some function well together, as I'm sure you understand, and some don't, right? So we're looking to combine these elements to make recipes, so to speak, that move us beyond our own comfort zone and help us to activate the individuation process in ourselves.
So you have a master's in counseling
Mm-hmm.
from Pacifica Graduate Institute.
Yes.
And of course, Pacifica, especially for those of us who are intuitively inclined, spiritually inclined, it is one of those institutions that's known for bringing an academic, intellectual understanding to, like spiritual, intuitive matters as well, right? Because I'm thinking about, they have these wonderful programs there. I've had my eye on that school for many, many years, and I think they do wonderful work. So how wonderful that you had a chance to go through that program. And so you have this master's in counseling. Do you have any antidotes about how you have seen this? Of course, we want to protect anonymity, nothing too identifying, but maybe some way in which you saw one of the people that you were counseling with actually engage this whole idea of turning their own lead into gold.
Absolutely. I work with these concepts in my practice all of the time. So I do tarot readings and things like that. And I look at them from an alchemical perspective immediately. Like you can gauge when the client walks in the door what they're dealing with. Are they dealing with fire energy, calcionado, like the heating up, the heat, which is, if you look at fire, it's consumptive, right? It gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it has to be channeled into something else, or it will consume everything. It's because it's fire, right? So if someone walks in the door and they're really angry, really impatient, they have a fire imbalance, right? So then you're working with softening, going underneath what the fire shows, going to the water, to the wet place, right? The feeling place. And you can, or someone comes in and they have a lot of sadness. You can see that they're just ready to cry or burst, into tears or whatever. And then maybe they need to get in touch with their calcionado. They need to get mad about stuff in their life, right? So absolutely, you see this all the time. Yeah. Sure.
Can you comment on, because you, when you talked about beforehand, before the actual interview, before we had cameras going. I mean, I'm seeing one of these things called stages of readiness. Stages of readiness. I would love to hear about that. What are those stages? What are we readying ourselves for?
So sometimes you'll have someone who says that they want to come to counseling and they won't,
Mhm.
and what they are is they're called pre-motivational, right? And that there's nothing wrong with that. Everybody is on their continuum. They grow at the stages that they do. You'll suggest something to them and it won't stick, right? That's how you know that they're pre-motivational. And then they're in a stage of readiness when they're heating up inside, or when they're really feeling their emotions, or when they're uh, doing a whole bunch of projects, right? They're activating the energies of earth, air, fire, or water, Scorpio, Cancer, Pisces, and what have you, all of the astrological energies, whichever correlate it is. And so you're seeing that actively in the room, so to speak.
Wow. And so they are readying to transform.
Yes, they're going through the alchemical process. They're oh, I'm get excited when I talk about this.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
in the retort. They're heating up and they're refining the energy. And what's going on is their story is the stuff of the retort. It is the burning off the lead to the gold, or to the lapis, as sometimes they say as well, to this precious, precious refined part of the self.
And so we must be able to see astrological markers for when somebody is about to embark on an alchemical process, or where they might be within it.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So we could see this in like a stellium, like I have a stellium in Cancer. So I'm just saying, like, we can see this in a grouping of elemental planets, and a tendency to go back to a certain way of responding. That is a refinement of a sort. We can also see it in the degrees. We can see it in the 0 degree or the 29th degree. People who have that beginning or ending synthesis in their life again and again and again because of those degree patterns.
Wow, that is interesting to contemplate, because, yeah, I would imagine that somebody with like a lot of Scorpio placements, eighth house placements, strong Pluto in their chart, for example, these are
Yes.
people who are going to likely, at least once, if not more, times in a life, engage this whole process of alchemy, and engage
Yes.
this whole process of, because it sounds a lot like the life, death, rebirth cycle is what you're describing.
Absolutely. Yes. The Scorpio cycle, or we can even look at it in terms of the Pluto cycle. I know we've
Mhm.
just gone through this Pluto in Capricorn, and now we're in Pluto in Aquarius, and how different they are, and how Pluto is about vomiting up everything that isn't for us, right? And so we're absolutely seeing that in this 18-year cycle.
Now, speaking of Pluto and vomiting, I'm going to give you a little bit of a personal antidote of my own.
Sure.
Okay. 2023. Okay. I'm traveling. I meet a guy. Right away, we hit it off. We have a connection that feels really strong.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at the synastry. Okay. And this is what the dude had going on by transit in his own chart. He had Pluto, transiting Pluto exactly to the degree towards the very end of the sign of Capricorn, conjunct his south node, and then transiting south node was exactly on his natal Pluto. Okay. And I
Wow.
remember looking at this and thinking, this
Whoa.
does not look like the chart of somebody who is about to embark on a stable and long-term relationship. This is
No,
the
not at
chart of
all.
somebody, this is the chart of somebody who's vomiting. So it's
Right.
so interesting you said that, because that's exactly, I remember thinking so clearly, oh my God, this dude right now is like vomiting in his life, right? He's expelling. Like,
Yes.
and it was, that's that we could say that the experience ended up being kind of like
Exciting and short-lived, but, when people are vomiting, they have to empty before they know what they're gonna do again, right?
wow, that is phenomenal to think about. Yeah, they have to empty. That's what it really is. I mean, we think about vomiting because it is sort of this violent type of process. Now, speaking of vomiting, I'll tell you another little antidote.
Yeah.
The start of the year, the start of 2025, January 1st, I head over to Tokyo. Okay. I had a Bumble date. For those of you who have no idea what I mean, you are very fortunate. But basically, Bumble is a dating app. And I had set up a date and I was going to meet the person. I was going to arrive and rest and then meet that person. Well, as soon as I arrive, the very first thing I eat, I started to feel really, really not well. And I remember I literally vomited for like, I don't know, 24 hours or something like that.
Oh no.
And I remember that there was this moment when I was over the sink and I'm holding the sink and it's like my body is trying to, I can't believe I'm telling this story, but my
Okay.
body is trying to like, there's nothing left in me to come out. And my
Yeah.
body, and I remember hearing in my brain, like telling myself, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. And then I heard a voice that said, no, I have so much more left to do in this lifetime. I always believed as a small child that I was going to live to 150 years old. I don't know where that came from, but I remember as a very small child telling people, my grandmother, my parents, that I was going to live to 150. And I was like, I have so much more yet to do in this lifetime. And I was like, no, the mind is a tool of the soul, and my soul knows there's
Wow.
lots more to do. And I sort of gave myself a pep talk, went back to bed, and woke up some, I don't know, 24 hours later. Dude had left Tokyo, so there was no Bumble date. And I felt
Yes.
right as rain as soon as I woke
That's
up.
fantastic. Well, you did the right thing. I mean, you raised the energetic vibration. You knew that you were in the retort and that you had to refine the energy. And
Wow.
you
I
did.
do it that way. Yeah. Like our thoughts refine the energy, isn't
Yeah,
it?
exactly, exactly. And that's the
Wow.
air energy. That's the
Mm.
sublimatio. That's the story, and that's how we tell the story. So if we're always focused on the backstory or the cultural story, we're not telling the story of the individuation process. We're not allowing ourselves to tell the new story, which is so
Mm.
important with sublimatio, to let the air blow through and move something into a different place.
Wow. Okay. So, someone who's in the middle of this process, like you said, I don't remember the exact word you used, but I'm thinking of it like expelling, right? Somebody's in a place of life and there's a lot of release going on and it feels overwhelming or it feels challenging. What is the best advice you could give somebody in a moment like that? Okay. Like that's the role of the counselor.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so, how does a consulting astrologer who maybe doesn't
Yes.
have those skills, how would they be able to be that container that you speak of?
That they're not alone, that other
Mhm.
people are doing this as well, because when you're going through a process like that, you feel like you're totally isolated, that you'll get through it, that you have to love yourself unconditionally, and that it's a process, not a product. That's right in my information when someone works with me, as this is a process, not a product, right? Which is
Mhm.
about the retort and the whole process, and that I'll support you every step of the way, right? And
Mhm.
that I want to hear everything that's going on. And that's that containment. Like I am the container for the spewing that you're doing. By listening, by mirroring back to the client what they're saying. So there's okay. So I don't know if you're familiar with Edward Edinger. He's a really interesting writer, and he talks about the different stages of psychotherapy. And in the first stage, the goal is to be the expert, because someone comes into the room looking for an expert, someone who can help them, fix them. Now we know that counseling can't fix a person. A person has to fix themselves and go through the process. But the counselor has to play the role of the person who's willing to sit in that space for a certain amount of time. Then, when they're in the retort, when the process is heating up, and some people come into the room and they're right in the retort, and you're like, boom, let's go. And other people come in and they want to say, like, what would you do? Da 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 da. They're putting you in the role of the expert. But in the second stage, they're like very much in the alchemical process of the experimentation, or what back in the day they would have called the trial and error. I can't remember the word that I used, but that word. Um, and so they're looking through the process of experimenting with all of these energies. They're looking for what works, right? They're looking for what sticks, what's meaningful. And in that stage, you want to mirror back to them. You want to say, I heard you say da 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 da. And you just kind of are their voice in the background. So they say, I'm feeling stronger. Sometimes I'm feeling weak. And you say, I'm feeling stronger. I hear you say, sometimes you're feeling stronger. Sometimes you're feeling weak. Like, what is it like to? So you're like really sitting there in the process, in the moment with them. And then in the third stage, which escapes me what it's called right now, but basically it's when they sit there and tell you everything and you go, yeah, tell me more. And they're like, and then this happened and this happened and this happened. And the synthesis happened and there was this explosion and I feel so different or whatever it is, right? And you're just like, and you don't have to say anything. Like they're in it. They've taken it in. They're going through that secondary connuncio oppositorum process. They're realizing that they are the refinement and they can change their own energy. And you should, at that point, you don't say anything. You just go, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. But as an astrologer, like, you're not seeing people regularly, normally. I mean, maybe some do, they're counseling astrologers, but as a consulting astrologer, like, for example, myself, I mean, yes, I'll have people come back, of course, but often if somebody's really coming back, I would say most of the time it's a one-off, and then maybe in future they might circle back around. I mean, I've literally have people say, oh, you did my reading 10 years ago, and then they come back around in some way. And then sometimes people, they might come like, every month or two for like 3 or 4 times, and then that's it. I don't see them again. And so it ends up being a little bit different because it's like all the stages you're talking about.
Yes.
It's like you're going through all of those stages in the span of just one consultation, in a sense, because
that makes sense.
Yeah, you're validating what they're saying, but you're connecting it to the chart. So someone tells you, like, I've been really angry. You're like, well, yeah, Mars is doing this in the chart.
Absolutely.
But I think as a consulting astrologer, the other thing that we can add is, one is that we validate what they're experiencing by connecting it to the chart and by connecting it to the stars. But the other thing is we give them a timeline, right? We're able to say, hey, this is only going to last until this time. After that, the energy is going to get different. It's going to change. And so in that way, having that layer of astrology, even though you as a consulting astrologer who might only have that one-off, it's almost like you're able to squeeze all those stages into one moment, into one brief, consultation moment, in a sense. What do you think of that?
I think that's amazing. And I'm going to say, I think that you're in the retort from the time they walk in the room. Mm-hmm. And then you're taking clues, like based on what they're saying and based on the information about the stars and the timelines and all of that, and listening a little bit to what they're saying, but you're playing all three of those roles, right? That Edinger talks about. You're playing the expert, you're playing the one who's in the experimental place, in that trial and error space, and you're playing the one who says, oh my gosh, you really get this stuff. Like, that when you have a stellium in Scorpio, this is what you need to do with it, right? And they go, this is what I need to do with it, right? And so it's like in that hour or 2 hours or whatever the time limit is, you're doing all of those pieces.
So I just want to step back because you say retort, and I just want to make it clear to people because a lot of people might not be able to define that word retort. Yes. And I'd love to hear your definition, but the way I understand it is cauldron. Like in the context of the alchemical process.
Well,
they're in the cauldron. It's stewing, it's cooking.
Yes.
And that's what you are as a consulting astrologer or counseling therapist, is that you are the cauldron. You are that container in which they're able to allow that sense of what might be brewing, that new sense of self that might be coming forward.
Absolutely. 100%. You said that so beautifully, I think.
Now, you asked me a question and it's escaped me there because I got all into the cauldron. The image of the cauldron kind of took me over. Do you remember
I've never used that image. I've never used that image so readily. I love it. I'm going to use it from now on. Because I think of it as more like this glass kind of enclosed thing like a wizard would use. But I love the cauldron that a witch would use. Like I'm all about that, Nadiya.
I know. I love all that stuff too. And at the start of the interview, you were talking about like indigenous cultures and how they incorporated that understanding of alchemy. And my goodness, if you go back far enough, Yeah, like that's the history of the world,
That's
really. That
right.
it's the history of all of humanity. That's where we started. We started from understanding elements, from understanding our connection to the elements,
Yes.
our connection to the earth.
Yes.
All of spirituality starts as earth-based spiritualities.
That's right.
And then they evolve, they go in different, different motivations, different levels. There are different ways of understanding why that happened, of course, right? Like
Yes.
the evolution of people and power and thought, but whatever it might be, there's something so primal within us that
Yes.
understands we are the elements. We are
Yes.
connected to
Yes.
everyone and everything.
Well, I would say part of the problem with our culture now is that we have forgotten that. We are so turned on to, popular media and media all the time that we forget our connection with earth, air, fire, water, and it's fundamental to who we are. I mean, internally and externally, both,
Yeah.
All we have to do is go out and be in it to remind
Be
ourselves.
in it. Yeah. Be in the element, or at least know what element you're in at a given
Yes,
moment. Like,
for
okay,
sure.
right now I got to work. I'm in earth,
That's
right?
right.
I
I'm
got to do what I
doing.
got to
I'm
do. What's in
producing.
yes, yes. Right now I got to produce, or right now I got to nurture the spark. I
That's
got to
right.
think about
The
that. That's the
fire.
fire. Right now I got to think things through. That's the air. Right
Yes,
now I'm
exactly.
feeling so much. That's the
Yes.
water. That's you.
Yes.
That's us. All of us. The human experience is the elements.
Absolutely. Yes, for sure. For sure. Yeah.
So once again, everybody, Jenny is coming to Synchronicity University as part of the July 2025 speaker series. You've got a little time left from the time this is publishing to choose your tuition rate, as low as just $5 a class. You can see how fascinating Jenny is to talk to. And Jenny is going to bring all this deeper understanding to alchemical psychology and so much more. So Jenny, I'm really looking forward to your talk. Thank you so much for being here. Well, first of all, for the
Absolutely.
years of lovely
Yeah.
interaction and love that you've given.
Thank you. Absolutely.
And if I remember correctly, you and I both used to have a crush on Ezra Klein. That's what I
think
remember
that's
about
true.
us.
Yes.
Yes, yes. I think we had a conversation about that years ago.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
he had a boyish charm to him back in the day, didn't he?
He did.
And so I remember that's how we first really connected. And then, of course, you gave so much wisdom. And so now it's so wonderful that you're here at Synchronicity University. And I'm really looking forward to your talk. So thank you again.
Thanks so much, Nadiya. I really appreciate it.
And thank you, everybody out there, for watching. Until we connect again, take care. Bye.
Bye.